So Lian Li was like, hey, do you want to check out our new HydroShift LCD AIO? And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sick of AIOs. I know we did like water cooling month stuff, but then I started doing some research about it. I started actually reading what customers were saying. And it turns out this might actually be one of the most advanced AIOs you could possibly put in your system. So today we're gonna take a look at what makes this different from just being another AIO and actually put this thing to the test. I'm actually kind of excited. I'm so excited I can't even talk. I guess I'm always excited then. With handheld gaming on the rise, take your ROG Ally or Steam Deck to the next level with the new Crucial P310 Gen 4 2230 NVMe SSD. With up to 7100 megabytes per second read speed and 6000 megabytes per second write speed and capacities up to 2 terabytes, you're sure to have the fastest load times, the smoothest gaming experience while ensuring plenty of room for today's modern titles. The P310 from Crucial is also suitable for various laptops like the Microsoft Surface and select Dell models. To see the full spec list, follow the sponsored link in the description below. So one thing that might be different about this, if you haven't really noticed, is they're calling it HydroShift because the tubes are actually coming out the side of the radiator. And we'll take a look at that in a second. Has a 2.88 inch IPS display on the pump, which has kind of become the normal. Like brands have to figure out how do we make our stuff unique and stand out. Well, now if you don't have a screen, you're kind of like an outlier of not being a top tier brand, I guess. It's a 480 by 480 pixel. Up to 79.9 CFM of airflow, 3.26 millimeters H2O of just head pressure for the pump, and it's a fluid dynamic bearing, 300 to 2400 RPM fans. Pretty standard stuff there, but what really makes this unique is some of the features built in for the screen. So as I kind of unbox this and take a look, I'm gonna install it. I'm gonna put this thing through like a 30-minute stress test. I'm gonna do a temperature chart where we show over time how those temperatures look like on a 13900K running at like Intel Extreme profile, not Asus or Gigabyte stuffs. So we're gonna make sure we keep those limits exactly where they should be for the Intel stuff. But anyway, you can see right here, the tubing comes out the side of the AIO. And the reason why Lian Li is doing that is to try and keep it as tidy as possible, because if the tubes come out the end, you got these tubes making a run all the way across your system, they kind of flex and start doing weird things. So it does feel like for the most part though, it's got about the same build quality as like the Galahad. Their Galahad was like their top tier AIO. The tubes are still coming from the normal spot on the radiator, but they have this kind of a shroud that is sort of guiding them to the side. We do have additional bracketry and stuff though, to where we can, I guess, flip it to the other direction if we need, we'll see. But we do have an extra shroud. Oh yeah, that's exactly what this is. It's just flipped. So this would be for the other side if needed. Anyway, kind of unique there because now if you put this in your system, ideally, you're not gonna have these tubes hanging down. They'll just be coming from behind the radiator. Granted, there's enough space right here between your radiator and the back of your, your motherboard and your case motherboard wall. Most cases now offset this a little bit, so you should have plenty of room right there. Okay, so in terms of connectivity, pretty standard stuff. We've got our USB header, and I do like the fact that it's all built into the pump coming out. I just wish that this were a little bit more tidy looking. Oh, okay, I guess it is kind of tidy. So it's got this single fat harness, if you will, that's got our SATA power. These are pretty long too. Maybe they finally heard our complaints about Lian Li cables always being too short. SATA power, USB coming out of the fat harness, and then this is gonna be for our pump right here, the small 4-pin PWM. So obviously it's a PWM pump, so that plugs into your motherboard header. I think it would have been nice though if this were at least sleeved within this tube, so it would have been tidier looking. About the only gripe I have so far based on what I'm seeing. Intel brackets pre-installed. All of the hardware is captive, which is gonna make this a lot easier when it comes to installing it onto your motherboard. You're not trying to line things up. You just gotta hold the pump, make sure your thermal paste is on there and the plastic is removed, line it up, screw it down, and this should work for, I'm assuming, pretty much any modern and old school Intel bracket. Does it come with what you need for, oh, and it's also got this, which I think is really cool. It's got this magnetic shroud that is designed to go on top of the hardware to make the hardware more presentable. So instead of seeing those screws and stuff, this just slides over it and then it makes it look nicer. So little things like that definitely start to give it a more premium feel. Here's our AMD brackets right here. We also have these little tube clamps right here, which are designed to also keep them sort of uniform as you're bending them around and stuff. So I like these little combs, if you will, for the tubes. But when it comes to the Intel side, It's gonna be really simple because all we have to do is take the 3M tape cover off. This will stick to the back of the socket, and then theoretically, that's all we have to do is these will just hold it down in place. Yeah, that's exactly all that is. So these are captive in the sense that they're friction fit. So these little nuts right here, as these are sticking to the motherboard, you push these down, they hold with friction, and then the block will just mount to that. So it's actually pretty easy. Looks like it should be pretty easy. Does come with a very frugal amount of thermal paste. It'd be nice to have more than one application's worth in there in case you get it wrong and you gotta wipe it and do it again, or you have to dismount it for some reason. And then it does come with a spatula to spread it. And then we also have an additional bracket right here with screw that can mount to the side of the radiator with these extra holes on the side that will allow us to be able to have our tubing also supported up there if we have to run it a little bit longer. So that's essentially what this is for. Like, let's say you need to have this go a little bit farther over. So that'll mount down on the side. Get out of here, wires. That'll mount down to the side, and then you have some adjustability on this so you have more mount, if you will, for the side of the tubes. Stuff like this is what makes me kind of excited to see. It looks like we only have this one mount right there, actually, that's available to it. But I like to see this sort of out-of-the-box thinking so that we can get a more premium look and feel to our components without everything just being the same. Okay, so what I need to do now is I need to get it installed into our system. We'll be stress testing it over 30 minutes, maybe even longer. Because what I'm looking for here is how long does it take for this thing to fully saturate? How well does it deal with the fact that it's getting hotter? How do the fans ramp up? I'm gonna let the L-Connect software handle everything. So the L-Connect will be doing all of the fan logic. Fortunately, it'll be able to see the coolant temperatures as well. So we'll see how this thing does over time. And we're gonna also take a look at our clock frequencies to see how do those take a hit over time. As the temp goes up, how do our frequencies also fare? So let's get it in our system and we'll talk about how the ease of installation went. Okay, so as you can see, it's installed. It's kind of nice, actually. I don't care for the tight bend it sort of puts on this, but there's no way without them coming straight up that it'd be able to not have that bend. However, it is nice to have the most of the tubing hiding now. There's no tubes this way. I just ended up using white zip ties to zip tie the cables to the back side of the tubing there. And then you can see the little covers installed and it's solid. I use the thermal paste that comes with it. There's barely enough for a single application. I want to point that out right now. So if you have to reapply for some reason because you messed up, you're going to need more thermal paste. Anyway, let's talk about temperatures here. So the way I did the temperatures for this, and I want you guys to comment if you appreciate this because I'm trying to give you guys more data that's actually meaningful than saying, hey, look, at the end of a 30-minute Cinebench run, here's the max temperature we had while using, this is Libre hardware monitor. I'm gonna do a video about this. This is so much better than hardware monitor in like many ways, and it's also free. So I might actually be switching over to Libre hardware monitor moving forward instead of HW or hardware monitor. Yeah, so the temperatures are not bad. So I have it set to the 13900K's 253 watt profile. Now that's still a pretty decent amount of cooling necessary for an AIO. But the voltages and stuff still kind of do what they're gonna do. They're still Inteling, if you will. So it still did go up to, at one point, 1.48 volts. Unfortunately with Intel now, things can vary so much, it's hard to get a real sense of what the parameters were. So you can see under full load right now, it's going to, so that's VCore 1.278, 1.28. So not bad. Also too, we have to keep in mind, this is an AIO. We're asking a lot of any AIO at 253 watts with a little tiny cold plate to cool anything Intel these days. So the 3 tests I did were using 3 of the fan profiles that are built into L-Connect. L-Connect, as you can see right here, does have multiple fan settings. We have quiet, standard, high speed, full speed, and then 4 custom profiles which you can make for yourself. So I used 3 of those. I did quiet, I did standard, and then I did full speed. Full speed also tells us like what is the maximum capable cooling of this cooler. I also did it in this case right here with the side panel off and the top panel off, meaning it's essentially an open air cooler at this point, meaning the case has no impact whatsoever on the cooler's capability of cooling. I also left the pump on dynamic. So right now the pump's at 2100 RPM while it's just idling. And then once it goes under load, the pump goes to full speed at about 3600 RPM. Anyway, it was 30-minute Cinebench runs, Cinebench R23. In my opinion, this is the hardest load the CPU is gonna see at all for any regular user. I mean, sure, there are workloads out there that are harder, but this is gonna be like the hardest test we run around here in terms of really stress testing a CPU to generate heat. We use it as a heat generator. So if we look at the standard profile, it actually starts off fairly smooth at about 76, 77 degrees Celsius. And then as the test progresses and we see equilibrium, it starts to normalize at about 84, 83 C. You'll notice these anomaly spikes right here. And these low points. So the low points is every time Cinebench restarts the test. Once that load stops, the CPU drops fast and comes down in temperature. Then the test restarts and it comes back up. So that's what the low points are in the chart. The high spikes in the chart, sometimes when it restarts the test and it reloads that test into memory, the CPU kind of goes under a quick, just kind of a quick a quick load. And so what happens is you'll get those little anomalous spikes in the chart right there. So that's why it's important to see a chart like this to be able to see what the temperatures look like over time, rather than to say, what's the max temperature we saw that hardware monitor or Libre monitor or whatever you're showing or watching it on shows. So you can get a real idea now of just how flat the temperatures are. When it comes to going to full speed, it's kind of really redundant because as you can see, the temperatures really are the same. It's kind of hard to see on the charts when they're overlaid. However, full speed takes a little bit longer for it to reach equilibrium versus the standard speed because the fans are going full speed the moment the test starts, which keeps the coolant temperature cooler longer than going the standard fan speed. But once the temps reach up to the same curve at about 84 C, the fans are running 100% on standard profile too. That's why they look pretty much identical. Now when we look at the quiet profile, it's much more aggressive when it comes to keeping the fans at a lower RPM. Fortunately though, it only led to about 3 C additional temperature. So we maxed out at 88 C on the quiet profile, and you can see the same spikes and the same low points there. Which means that this cooler is actually pretty consistent, whether you have the fan set to quiet or you have it set to full speed. Now, obviously you put the side panels and stuff on your case will have a bigger impact on how the cooler is going to perform. Now, one downside about this cooler is if you do want it mounted to the front of your case, you would have to remove the shroud entirely to do that, and then you kind of lose the whole point of what it's being called as a HydroShift, because this cover right here is just covering the tubing going sideways and coming out the back right there. So you could still technically mount it to the front. However, you kind of are losing the whole point of what makes it the HydroShift. And in this particular case, it wouldn't even work because these fans right now are mounted directly to the radiator and they're wired through the sleeving that's on the tubing, so you can't even really separate the fans comfortably to get them on the outside of the bracket, which is where they have to mount. So it really is intended to be mounted on the top only. So let's talk about some of the functionality right here. So as you can see, we've got the IPS 480 by 480 2.88 inch screen right there. This is the default scene that you get right here, which is this kind of a space marble or whatever, I don't know what to call it. It is cycling through a bunch of different things. So it's cycling through CPU temp, GPU temp, CPU load, GPU load, and pump RPM. You can set how long the loop lasts. You can turn off certain things you don't want it to cycle through. And then you can even do things like, let's add the time to it. So we just add the time if you want it, and you can choose where you want it to go. So anyway, there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do. You can add your own text right now. So now it's just showing text, which is, I guess, cool if you want to just say something. But for instance, we do have a moving background in the back, which kind of makes it look, well, it stopped, but it does make it look a little bit less boring than just having text. But you can play around with that. You can play around with the fonts and the size and the colors and all that sort of stuff there. What I think is neat is we have a whole bunch of pre-installed. So this is called Style Express. Essentially, it just becomes a bunch of different little sensors that are visible to you. So you can see RAM usage, you can see the CPU temp, you can see the date and time, you can see the GPU temp all in the same time. And we have different themes for that as well. So essentially just makes it a useful sensor panel on the front of your AIO, which if you're gonna put a screen on there, you might as well make it something useful. So I mean, it's pretty neat. It's a little bit small though on the text, so depending on your eyesight, you might have a hard time seeing it, but there is that. Now you don't have to use those if you don't want. You can use image backgrounds, you can upload your own image, you can just make it a solid background color if you want. And then there's a bunch of other animations that you can do. So like we have meteor shower, okay, I guess, kinda. But there's a bunch of other stuff that you can use for backgrounds. You'll notice that Admiral J is in the background right there, because if, let's say you want to have your own image, if you're like, oh, this is super cool, this might be the easiest way to load an image, in my opinion, ever on an AIO screen. You want that to be your background image. I remember taking that picture too, by the way. So all you have to do is bring up the L-Connect software, move it to the side, click Add, and then you can upload materials for editing, or you can just do screen capture. So the screen capture brings up the automatic 480 by 480, and then you can scale this if you want. Drag that to where you want it to be your new image. Click the checkbox. And then, so you can actually then do an editor on it if you want to. I'm not gonna even worry about that right now. We'll just import the picture. Now, Admiral J is Doofus J. I don't know what you should call him at that point. That's considered a watermark, so that's why it looks kind of washed out like that technically. I mean, I guess you can play around with that as you wish. There's different things you can do with it, but I think this is a cool looking one. It's kind of a new take on the whole RGB thing. It's just sort of like a psychedelic swirl. Let's say you had it rotated sideways. You can literally rotate it by clicking the little triangle with an arrow on it. So that way it's always facing the right way based on the way that you have the cooler. Okay, one other thing to talk about here, we have to talk about price. This bad boy is a $199 cooler in its current configuration. It comes with two configs. This is the HydroShift RGB. So we have the same screen, and we have, it's just their RGB fans with the edge lighting and then the hub lighting. Or you can get it in the Unifan version, which means it has their higher end Unifans on there for an additional 60 bucks, $59.99. So $259.99 for the price of the Lian Unifan version, or $199 for the ARGB version. I personally would just stick to the RGB version. But regarding the temperatures, it pretty much performs like most 360s do at 253 watts. So the value is really gonna have to ask yourself, is $200 worth it to to invest into a cooler? It's expensive, it really is. There are air coolers that are much cheaper that can get near this performance. It's getting harder now for tower coolers to meet this kind of performance demand when it comes to, especially all the Intel fiasco. But you can see with just how minimalist it is, maybe not minimalist on the screen itself, but the actual install. I think this fits the Lian Li catalog, if you will. Lian Li has a way of doing things that just seems different than most people, and that definitely holds true with the way they designed this cooler. I kind of wish that the cover right here for the hardware was black though. I think the four white corners really kind of stand out, and even on a white cooler, I feel like the black right there would have stealthed it a little bit more. So I'm not a fan of the white cooler. I guess you could technically spray paint it or something if you wanted to. But I do think that sticks out a little bit like a sore thumb. But installing it was super easy. You put the back plate through the motherboard, you put the standoffs like I showed on there, they just press on there. Install the radiator first, depending on your case. So in this one, I installed the rad first. I left the pump sort of hanging out, and then I lined the pump up after I applied my thermal paste, and then just screwed down all 4 screws and then put the cover on. It was actually extremely easy. And then since there's only 2 wires coming off the back, you've got your SATA power, actually 3 technically. You got your SATA power, your USB header, and then your 4-pin PWM. You might be wondering, if it's got a 4-pin PWM that's plugged in right there, why do we have a speed control here? Well, that's because the pump is not actually being powered off of the header right there. It's just giving us a PWM signal for the computer to be able to see, and it's giving some supplemental power to the screen and such itself. The other thing is that 4-pin PWM is allowing you to do pass-through, which means you can tell L-Connect for the fans and the pump to ignore its settings and listen to the motherboard settings. I could just be like, boom, use the motherboard. So now that header is telling the fans and the pump what to do based on what the motherboard's logic is for controlling the fan. So anyway, there you go. It's not the cheapest cooler on the market, but I think it definitely is giving us some unique things to look at when it comes to how to reinvent the AIO. The pump and the fans and the radiator, that's standard. They're all gonna have that. But now brands are having to come up with new, unique ways to incentivize viewers. My question to you is gonna be, is the $199 buy-in price tag for the RGB version worth it to you? Or is it just too much? Is it just too much when it comes to the return on your, I think keeping our devices as cool as possible is a huge return on investment. That's why I always do custom water cooling on all my systems. But it's hard to beat the minimalist look on this particular unit. All right, guys, sound off down below. My opinion means nothing. You guys as the buyers are what determine how brands move forward. So sound off down below. I promise they're going to be reading. And if you're using this, what do you think about it? Any complaints? Sound off down in the comments below. Thanks. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.